In 1964, a woman named Kitty Genovese was stabbed to death outside her apartment in New York City. The attack lasted over half an hour. 38 neighbors witnessed it. Not one of them called the police. Not one of them intervened. They watched, and she died. That story became one of the most cited cases in all of psychology. It launched an entire field of research. It's in every intro psychology textbook. It spawned a concept, the bystander effect, that you've almost certainly heard of. There's just one problem. The story isn't true. Not like slightly embellished. The central claim, 38 witnesses, nobody helped, was a fabrication. A New York Times reporter exaggerated the witness count and the extent of the inaction. Subsequent investigations found that witnesses had shouted at the attacker, at least one person called the police, and the fatal attack happened inside a building where nobody could see. But here's the deeply unsettling part. The bystander effect is completely real. The research proving it is overwhelming, and the actual truth of what happens when people witness emergencies is somehow darker than the myth. Let's start with the real science. The bystander effect was first formally studied by social psychologists John Darley and Bib Latané in 1968, directly inspired by the Genovese case. And what they found in their experiments was genuinely alarming. In one study, participants were placed alone or in groups and exposed to what sounded like someone having a seizure in the next room. When participants were alone, 85% helped within 60 seconds. When participants believed there were other people present, only 31% helped, and they took significantly longer to do it. Same emergency, same sound, completely different response based on whether the person thought they were the only one who could act. This is the core mechanism, diffusion of responsibility. When multiple people are present at an emergency, each individual's sense of personal obligation to act gets distributed across the group. The more people present, the less any single person feels responsible. In a crowd of strangers watching someone collapse, everyone is waiting for someone else to step up. And it compounds with two other psychological processes that make it worse. Pluralistic ignorance. When nobody in a group is visibly reacting to a situation, each individual assumes the others know something they don't. If everyone around you looks calm, you assume the situation must not be an emergency, even if the situation clearly is one. You're all looking at each other for social cues while simultaneously all trying to look calm. The group collectively convinces itself that nothing is wrong. Evaluation apprehension, the fear of looking stupid in front of other people. What if you run over to help and it turns out the person is fine and you've made a scene? What if you misread the situation? The social cost of being visibly wrong in public is enough to delay action long enough for the window to close. Three separate psychological mechanisms all pointing in the same direction. Don't act. Wait. Someone else will handle it. Okay, so back to Kitty Genovese. Because the myth versus reality gap here is genuinely interesting and says something important about how psychology gets communicated. The original New York Times story from March 27, 1964 was written by a reporter named Martin Gansberg under the headline, "37 Who Saw Murder Didn't Call the Police." The number later became 38 in popular retellings. The claim was that neighbors had watched the entire attack through their windows and done absolutely nothing. Subsequent investigations, including a 2007 academic analysis by psychologists Rachel Manning, Mark Levine, and Alan Collins, found that the original reporting was significantly distorted. The actual witness count was disputed. The attack happened in 3 separate stages, with the fatal stabbing occurring inside a building where it couldn't be seen from apartment windows. At least one witness shouted from their window after the first attack, which caused the attacker to flee, temporarily. Another witness called police. A neighbor named Sophie Farrar ran to Genovese after the final attack and held her as she died. This is not the story of 38 people who did nothing. It's significantly more complicated than that. But here's why the myth persisting is its own problem. The Kitty Genovese story has been used for 60 years to teach the bystander effect. The lesson being, people are shockingly passive in emergencies when others are present. Look what happened. Look at those 38 people. But if the foundational case study was exaggerated, if the story people have been internalizing for 60 years is partially fabricated, then what has that actually taught us about ourselves? Because the bystander effect is real. The research confirming it is solid regardless of what happened on that specific night in 1964. But the myth may have taught people the wrong thing about why it happens and when it happens, which matters enormously for whether you'd actually recognize it in yourself. Here's the thing about the bystander effect that every psychology lecturer buries in the footnotes, and I'm going to say plainly, knowing about it does not protect you from it. This is the part that should actually disturb you. You've now heard the concept. You know about diffusion of responsibility. You know about pluralistic ignorance. You're informed. But guess what? You would still do it. Studies testing whether psychology students, people who had literally just been taught the bystander effect, were more likely to help in an emergency, found that the knowledge provided essentially zero protective effect in the moment. The mechanisms that produce the bystander effect operate faster than conscious reasoning. By the time your brain has decided to override the social cues pulling you toward inaction, the window has often already closed. Real examples that happened after decades of bystander effect research and public awareness. In 2011, Raymond Zack waded into the waters of a California beach and stood neck deep for an hour. Police and firefighters arrived and watched from the shore, citing regulations. Beachgoers watched. Nobody entered the water. He drowned. These aren't people who didn't know about the bystander effect. They're people whose brains, in the moment, ran the exact same social calculation that Darley and Latané documented in 1968. The Darley and Latané seizure study participants didn't help, not because they were bad people. They were normal people, university students. People who, if you asked them beforehand, would have said of course they'd help someone having a seizure, and 69% of them didn't when others were present. Here's the mechanism that makes this so hard to override. The brain's threat assessment in social situations runs faster than conscious deliberation. The signals telling you to look around, assess how others are reacting, defer to the group, those fire before you've consciously decided anything. By the time you formed the thought, I should probably do something, you've already been standing there for 15 seconds watching other people not act, which your brain has already registered as social confirmation that action isn't required. You're not choosing to be passive, you're being processed. So what actually breaks the bystander effect? Because the research on this is both genuinely useful and kind of bleak in what it reveals. The single most effective intervention is direct personal address. Not general, someone call an ambulance, pointing at a specific person and saying, you in the red jacket, call an ambulance right now. The moment diffusion of responsibility is eliminated, the moment one person is singled out, the psychological paralysis breaks almost immediately. That person now has unambiguous personal responsibility and the social calculation shifts completely. This is why first aid training teaches you to do exactly this. Not, can someone help? You, call 999. You, help me with compressions. Specificity demolishes diffusion. The second factor is prior relationship. Research consistently shows people are dramatically more likely to help when they have any existing connection to others present, even a trivially brief one. Studies show that if you've even spoken to someone for 2 minutes before an emergency, you're significantly more likely to help them and significantly more likely to be helped by people who overheard the conversation. Strangers are the worst case scenario. Any social connection at all improves outcomes. And the third, and this is the uncomfortable one, is reduced group size. The bystander effect weakens as the number of bystanders decreases. One bystander is far more likely to help than 10, which means the crowd that makes you feel safer is actually the thing making you less safe. The infrastructure of modern public life, densely populated, anonymous urban environments full of strangers, is precisely the condition that makes the bystander effect worst. You are surrounded by people who would each individually help you in a one-on-one situation. Together, in a crowd, the probability drops off a cliff. So here's where this lands. The bystander effect is not a character flaw. It's not cowardice. It's not evidence that people are secretly selfish. It's a predictable output of social cognition under specific conditions. Conditions that modern life creates constantly and at scale. The myth of Kitty Genovese told us we were passive because we were bad. The actual research says we're passive because we're human. Our brains run social calculations faster than conscious thought, and in crowds, those calculations produce inaction almost automatically. Knowing this doesn't make you immune. But here's the thing that I genuinely can't stop thinking about since I went down this research hole. If the mechanisms are automatic, if knowledge doesn't protect you, if the conditions of modern life make it worse rather than better, and if the foundational story we've been using to teach this concept for 60 years was significantly distorted, what else are we getting wrong about how we'd actually behave when it matters? I really appreciate you guys watching and listening. Like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video, and leave a comment below on what you want me to cover next.